Hey everybody, and welcome back to another lecture with Coding with Roby. And in this video of the Python Bootcamp, we're going to learn about classes. Classes is the fundamental resource for object-oriented programming. We're going to cover the basics to creating and instantiating classes. We use classes to logically group data that is easy to reuse and to build upon. So let's start by creating a class called student. Inside student, I'm going to write pass. I added pass because it would throw an error, but first I want to talk about the difference between a class and an instance of a class. A class is really just the design for an instance of a class. Let's start by creating a variable called student1, which is equal to student, but student will have a capital S because we're referencing the class. And let's create another variable, student2, which is also equal to student. If we print student1 and then we print student2 and run the application, you'll see that both student1 and student2 reference a different area of memory. Think of it as if you had two strings. You would expect two strings to hold different values, but still fundamentally operate as a string. We can add to the student1 class instance by typing in student1.firstname, which is equal to Eric. We can do student1.lastname and make that equal to Roby. And lastly, we can do student1.major, which is equal to computer science. We can do the exact same thing with student2 by typing student2.firstname equals John. Student2.lastname equals Miller. And student2.major equals math. We can now print student1.firstname and student2.firstname. If we run the application now, we'll receive to the terminal Eric and John. We can change first name to last name, and we'll get back Roby and Miller. Lastly, we can do student1.major and student2.major to print to the terminal computer science and math. There's an easier way to add attributes and instance variables to your class. We can initialize a class with values when we create it. We can do this by typing in def and then using a special init function. So 2 underscores in front, init 2 underscores, and then as the arguments we'll pass in self, first name, last name, and major. Now, the first argument is called self. Self stands for the instance variable after passing itself in. We now want to pass in the instance variables we're using to define the class. So once we pass in the class instance and we pass in the 3 variables we want to initialize it with, we can now say self.firstname equals firstname, self.lastname equals lastname, and self.major equals major. Now remember, self is the instance of itself. So we are setting the attributes to itself. So now when we create a new student, we can say student1 equals student, and then type in the first name, last name, and major, which is Eric Roby in computer science. The self argument will get passed in automatically. Now student 2 equals student, where we'll type in John, Miller, and math. And again, the self instance argument will get passed in automatically. Now we can print student 1 dot first name, and we can print student 2 dot first name. When we run the application, we'll again get Eric and John, because when we created student 1 and student 2, we initialized the object class with the attributes we want to set to the instance itself. Now we can also add class methods to the class itself. We can start by typing in def, full name with major, and pass in self as the argument. So we'll be passing in the class instance into this function. We then want to return self.firstname, self.lastname is a self.major. So now we can say print student1 dot full name with major and print student2 dot full name with major. And when we run the application, we'll get to the terminal. Eric Roby is a computer science major and John Miller is a math major. The class instance dot full name with major automatically passes in the class instance. Another way of doing it without having the class instance passed in automatically is we can say student, which is a class, dot full name with major, and then pass in the class instance of student 2. We'll get the exact same result both times. Using the class instance dot the class method is definitely more popular to use. But now let's talk about object-oriented programming class variables. Class variables are variables that all instances of the class share. Instance variables are changing depending on the instance the class creates. So let's start by creating a class variable. At the top of the class, I'll type in a new variable called school and name it online school. If we rerun the application, we'll see that we get Eric Roby is a computer science major and John Miller is a math major. If we do student1.school, we'll print online school. If we change this argument to student2.school, we'll also get online school. Let's create a new function. So def full name major school, and we'll pass in self as the argument. And within the function, we'll return self.firstname self.lastname is a self.major that goes to self.school. We come down to our print functions and change student1.full name with major and student2.full name major school, and we rerun the application, we'll see that it prints Eric Roby is a computer science major and we'll see that John Miller is a math going to online school. If we change student 1 to full name major school, we'll see Eric Roby is a computer science going to online school. Let's create another class variable called number of students, which is equal to 0. And inside the initialization method, we'll type student.number of students plus equal 1. What this is doing is each time a new student is created, we're adding 1 to the number of students and keeping track of how many students are created within the class itself. So let's type in a print function and pass in number of students equals student.number of students. And then after initializing 2 students of student 1 and student 2, we'll copy and paste and put number of students student.number of students. In the terminal, you'll see that we get number of students equals 0 and number of students equals 2. That's because on line 27, there are no students created yet. And on line 30, 2 students were created, Eric and John. So a quick recap of what we're doing here is we have a new class called student with number of students equals 0 and school equals online school. We initialize a new student, and each time a new student is initialized, we add 1 to number of students. And now we want to add a new method that changes the variable of school. We can initialize a method as a class method by using a decorator. You can use a decorator by using the @ sign, so @class method. And then underneath this, we'll create a new function. So def set online school. And as the first argument, we'll use CLS, which stands for class. And as a second argument, we'll pass in new school. Within the function, we'll type class.school equals new school. So what is happening is when this method is called, whatever argument is getting passed in as new school is changing the school variable within the entire class. So any class instance that references school will now use the new variable. Print student1.school and we print student2.school, we'll get online school printed to both. So let's type in student.setOnlineSchool. And as the argument, I'll type in I use Google Hangouts for class. And then underneath this, we do 2 more student.schools. We'll see that we get to the terminal online school, I use Google Hangouts for class, I use Google Hangouts for class. But let's say we are obtaining a user in an odd way that doesn't automatically initialize a new student. So let's create a new variable called new student and pass it in as a string. So as a string, I'll say adl.utsi.english. Adl being the first name, Utsi being the last name, and English being the major. Let's now create a new method using the @class method decorator and create a new method called def split students. As the arguments, I'll pass in class and I'll pass in student string. Within the split students method, I'll type first name, last name, and major. Is equal to student string dot split at every period. We now can return class and pass in first name, last name, and major. What returning class means is returning an initialized instance. So we can type in student3 equals student.splitStudents and pass in the string of new student. Now that student3 is initialized because we returned the class, and we can use student3 as an object, so student3.firstname, just like we can do the same thing with student1 and student2. If we want to change the first name to full name major school, we'll get to the terminal. Adol Yudsi is a English going to online school, and that's because we initialized the student3 with the return class of split students. This wraps up object-oriented programming, and I will see you in the next video.